From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
My son loved this city, and this city killed my son, and the murderer gets away.
Black Lives Matter protests continue in the Twin Cities after a Minnesota police officer was acquitted Friday in the killing of Philando Castile, an African-American man shot 5 times during a traffic stop last year. His girlfriend filmed the aftermath and streamed it live on Facebook.
You told him to get his ID, sir, and his driver's license. Oh my God, please don't tell me he's dead. Please don't tell me my boyfriend just went like that.
Keep your hands where they are, please.
Yes, I will, sir. I'll keep my hands where they are.
We'll get the latest from the Twin Cities and air a report from street protests following the acquittal here in New York. Plus, we look at why 6 members of President Trump's Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS have just resigned to protest his policies. And we'll speak to the Egyptian novelist Robert Omar Hamilton on the growing crackdown on dissent in Egypt and Donald Trump's embrace of Egyptian leader General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi.
We agree on so many things. I just want to let everybody know, in case there was any doubt, that we are very much behind President al-Sisi. He's done a fantastic job in a very difficult situation.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Britain, a driver plowed into a crowd of Muslims near a North London mosque today, killing 1 person and injuring 8 others in what British officials are calling a terrorist attack. Witnesses described a large white man driving a van who accelerated and swerved into a crowd of worshippers who'd left nighttime prayers marking the Muslim holy month of Ramadan.
Basically drove on the pavement, coming straight towards all the Muslims, and as he's coming to them, he hit all of them, and I think one of them died.
One of them died straight away.
One of them died, and then the rest are in a bad condition.
So can you give me, how many people did you see lying injured on the floor, trying to remember?
About 7, 8.
And they were seriously injured?
Seriously injured. And then as the police come, they moved all of us quick.
One witness said the driver shouted, "I want to kill Muslims." Survivors of the attack pinned the man to the ground until police arrived on the scene and arrested him. British Prime Minister Theresa May said police are treating the incident as a terrorist attack. It was the 3rd time in recent weeks in Britain an attacker used a vehicle as a weapon aimed at pedestrians. In Virginia, police arrested 22-year-old Darwin Martinez-Torres Sunday for allegedly murdering a 17-year-old Muslim teenager after she left a restaurant following nighttime prayers in the Washington, D.C. suburb of Sterling. Nabra Hassanan disappeared early Sunday after she and a group of friends were confronted by a motorist outside a 24-hour IHOP near her mosque, the Old Dulles Area Muslim Society. Police found Hassanan's remains Sunday afternoon in a nearby pond. She was reportedly killed by blows from a metal bat. A recent study by the Council on American Islamic Affairs showed anti-Muslim hate crimes surged in 2016 over the previous year, rising by 44%. In Minnesota, protesters took to the streets Sunday for a 3rd straight day after a St. Anthony police officer was acquitted Friday in the killing of a black man he shot 5 times during a traffic stop last year. Officer Geronimo Yanez was acquitted on charges of manslaughter for killing African-American motorist Philando Castile. The jury of 7 men and 5 women, 10 of whom were white and 2 African-American, deliberated for more than 25 hours over 5 days before acquitting Yanez on all charges. This is Philando Castile's sister, Alize, speaking just after Friday's verdict.
And I'm really just so hurt because he took away something so precious from me. That was my brother, that was my mentor, that was my father figure, that was everything. That man worked hard every single day, every birthday, every Christmas. He was the one that made sure I had gifts. He didn't deserve to die the way he did. And I will never have faith in this system. I will never have faith in this system.
Philando Castile's death was live-streamed on Facebook by his girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, in an extraordinary video in which she narrated the aftermath of the shooting while she was still in the car, with Officer Yanez pointing a gun at her and her 4-year-old daughter. On Friday evening, about 2,000 demonstrators gathered outside Minnesota's state capitol in St. Paul to demand police accountability. Several protesters blocked a main interstate between St. Paul and Minneapolis, resulting in 18 arrests. Peaceful demonstrations continued throughout the weekend. For more on the killing, we'll go to the Twin Cities after headlines. In the Western Pacific, the U.S. Navy says it has recovered the bodies of 7 missing sailors who died after their warship collided with a cargo ship off the coast of Japan. Saturday's collision nearly sank the USS Fitzgerald, a naval destroyer, and came despite clear weather conditions. In Iraq, a U.S.-led military coalition has begun its assault on Mosul's Old City, a densely populated urban area and the last stronghold of ISIS in the northern Iraqi city. The UN said Friday as many as 150,000 people remain trapped in the district, describing their situation as desperate. Residents of western Mosul who were able to escape describe scenes of starvation.
We have nothing to eat, no flour, no rice, just nothing at all. We had to eat grass and made grass soup to feed our children. The leaves even cost 7,000 dinars per kilogram.
There were reports of heavy fighting and close-quarters battles in Mosul's Old City, with unconfirmed reports that more than a dozen civilians were killed in U.S.-led airstrikes over the weekend. In Syria, U.S. fighters shot down a Syrian warplane Sunday in the latest direct attack on a Syrian government target. The Pentagon said it downed the plane after it bombed U.S.-backed anti-government rebels. Meanwhile, the United Nations said an estimated 200,000 civilians remain trapped in the city of Raqqa as a U.S.-led coalition pounds the city in a campaign against ISIS. The UN says the airstrikes have killed at least 300 civilians in Raqqa since March. In the United States, one of Donald Trump's personal attorneys insisted Sunday the president is not under investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller as part of an investigation into alleged Russian meddling in November's election. The comments by the lawyer, Jay Sekulow, directly contradict President Trump's tweet Friday, which read, "I am being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director. Witch hunt." Sekulow made the rounds on Sunday morning's talk shows to deny that Trump is under investigation, but during a heated exchange with Fox News host Chris Wallace, Sekulow contradicted his own denials.
So he's being investigated for taking the action that the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General recommended him to take by the agency who recommended the termination. So that's the constitutional threshold question here. That's why, as I said, no investigation.
What's the question? I mean, you stated some facts. First of all, you've now said that he is being investigated after saying that you didn't.
No.
You just said,
no, he's
sir,
not being
that
investigated.
you just said that he's being investigated.
6 members of the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS have resigned, saying President Trump doesn't care about HIV. They announced their resignations in a joint letter published in Newsweek, headlined, "Trump doesn't care about HIV, we're out of here." In the letter, they wrote, quote, "As advocates for people living with HIV, we've dedicated our lives to combating this disease and no longer feel we can do so effectively within the confines of an advisory body to a president who simply does not care." Later in the broadcast, we'll speak with Scott Schodas, one of the 6 people who resigned. President Trump said Friday he would reverse the normalization of relations between the U.S. and Cuba, reimposing travel and trade restrictions less than a year after President Obama relaxed the decades-old U.S. embargo on the island. The move drew outrage across Cuba. This is Havana resident Pedro Diaz.
Cuba's not scared. We Cubans are not going to be scared. We've gone through much more. We got through the October Cuban Missile Crisis, and we're willing to go through many crises. Not just October, but December, September, and the coming months. We are ready, Mr. President Trump, for all your antics. There you are. If you were going to pay the Miami Mafia, at some point, you will pay.
President Trump's order will prohibit all business with companies that are linked to the Cuban military, which is involved in much of the hotel and tourism industries. Last year, Newsweek reported Donald Trump's businesses violated the U.S. embargo during the late 90s, secretly doing business in Cuba, then trying to cover it up. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights has launched an investigation into whether the Trump administration is failing to protect civil rights amid steep cuts to budgets and staffing levels across the federal government. In a statement, commissioners said, quote, "These proposed cuts would result in a dangerous reduction of civil rights enforcement across the country, leaving communities of color, LGBT people, older people, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups exposed to greater risk of discrimination," end quote. The probe came as the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights said it has ended an investigation into the case of a transgender Ohio student who says she was harassed at school and barred from using the girls' bathroom. Meanwhile, BuzzFeed is reporting the Commerce Department has removed any mention of gender identity and sexual orientation from its Equal Opportunity Employment Statement on the department's website. Back in the United Kingdom, hundreds of protesters stormed a town hall in London Friday, demanding justice for those killed when the 24-story Grenfell Tower apartment building went up in flames last week. Police scuffled with scores of angry residents shouting, "We want justice," and "They let our children burn."
Some people are only coming here to look at the building, and what we actually need to do is come here and have justice for the people that are suffering, families and people that were in the fire, the victims. Yeah. And I feel like it's not fair.
It's a lot of injustice and negligence from the government and the council. The death shouldn't have happened. Like, so many kids died, so many families were lost.
Police said today the death toll from the blaze rose to at least 79, with dozens more injured. London Mayor Sadiq Khan called the fire a preventable accident that followed years of neglect by successive governments.
People who live in tower blocks across London but around the country being sick to death whether their tower block is safe. We need to know as soon as possible whether those tower blocks are safe, and there's to be as much transparency as possible.
The company that recently renovated Grenfell Tower admitted over the weekend it used highly flammable yet less expensive cladding during construction. The cladding's banned from use in U.S. and European Union but allowed in Britain. In Pennsylvania, prosecutors say they will retry Bill Cosby on criminal sexual assault charges after a jury deadlocked over whether to convict the comedian on 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault. The mistrial means Cosby will once again face charges he drugged and sexually assaulted Andrea Constant, the former director of operations for the women's basketball team at Temple University, at Cosby's home in 2004. Constant is one of about 60 women who've accused Cosby of sexual assaults dating back decades. And in Arizona, a humanitarian aid group helping migrant border crossers says U.S. Border Patrol officers raided their medical aid encampment, arresting 4 migrants and endangering the lives of others. Last Thursday's raid on the No More Deaths encampment, about 15 miles from the Mexican border in the U.S., reversed an informal policy under the Obama administration that for years saw Border Patrol agents allow the group to provide water, food, shelter, and medical aid to migrants. In a statement, No More Deaths said, "The targeting of this critical medical aid is a shameful reflection of the current administration's disregard for the lives of migrants and refugees, making an already dangerous journey even more deadly," unquote. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. In Minnesota, protesters took to the streets Sunday for a 3rd straight day after a St. Anthony police officer was acquitted Friday in the killing of a black motorist he shot 5 times during a traffic stop last year. Officer Geronimo Yanez was acquitted on charges of manslaughter for killing Philando Castile, an African-American who worked as a school nutrition services supervisor for the St. Paul Public Schools. The shooting made international headlines after Castile's girlfriend documented the aftermath of the shooting by broadcasting live on Facebook from the car moments after Castile was shot. In the video, Officer Yanez is seen pointing a gun at her and her 4-year-old daughter.
He was trying to get out his ID and his wallet out his pocket, and he let the officer know that he had a firearm and he was reaching for his wallet, and the officer just shot him in his arm. We're waiting for a back. I will, sir. No worries. I will. He just shot his arm off. We got pulled over on Larpener.
I told him not to reach for it. I told him to get his hand out.
You told him to get his ID, sir, and his driver's license. Oh my God, please don't tell me he's dead. Please don't tell me my boyfriend just went like that.
Keep your hands where they are, please.
Yes, I will, sir. I'll keep my hands where they are. Please don't tell me this, Lord. Please, Jesus, don't tell me that he's gone. Please don't tell me that he's gone. Please, officer, don't tell me that you just did this to him. You shot 4 bullets into him, sir. He was just getting his license and registration, sir.
That was Diamond Reynolds narrating the aftermath of the police shooting of her boyfriend, Philando Castillo. Prosecutors opened the trial by playing a police dash cam video of Castillo's killing, which shows Officer Yanez opening fire on Castillo 7 times as he sat in the car. A medical expert testified Castillo was struck with 5 of the rounds, including 2 which pierced his heart. The jury of 7 men, 5 women, 10 of whom were white, 2 African-American, deliberated for more than 25 hours over 5 days before acquitting Officer Yanez on all charges. Philando Castillo's mother, Valerie Castillo, spoke after the verdict.
My son would never jeopardize anyone else's life by trying to pull a gun on an officer, and the gun was not fire ready. These are some of the facts that came out in the trial, and I am so very, 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 very disappointed in the system here in the state of Minnesota, because nowhere in the world do you die from being honest and telling the truth. The system continues to fail black people, and they will continue to fail you all. Like I said, because this happened with Philando, when they get done with us, they're coming from you, for you, and all your interracial children. Y'all are next.
About 2,000 demonstrators gathered outside Minnesota State Capitol in St. Paul on Friday evening, and a series of speakers demanded justice for people of color in the judicial system and police accountability. Several protesters blocked a main interstate between St. Paul and Minneapolis Friday night, resulting in 18 arrests. Peaceful demonstrations continued throughout the weekend.
Protesters also gathered in New York Saturday. Democracy Now!'s Sam Alcoff filed this report.
Why do you bring harm to a world you was blessed in? Why must we pay for your stressing? How many more arraignments without a confession? Why take away the ones we put our blood and our flesh in? How often do you misusing your weapon? How many wakes have our families wept in? How many hills have our black mothers stepped in to stand over caskets they babies slept in? What if those bullets were intercepted? What if your children were the ones to catch it? Would you fight back and respect it?
I'm Hawk Newsom, president of Black Lives Matter Greater New York. Philando Castillo was driving in his car. An officer pulled him over and shot him in front of his wife and his daughter. Okay? He informed the officer that he had a pistol and a permit to carry that pistol. However, this officer still shot him. The officer said he reached for his gun. I told him not to reach. His wife replied. His wife said, you told him to get his ID, and they killed that man and let him bleed out in front of his family. Luckily, his wife had the presence of mind to go on Facebook Live to record this injustice. So now you had outrage last summer, and now you had the trial. The trial was mishandled by the prosecutor. They would like to call this a mistake, but there's no mistake about it when time after time again you fail to prosecute cops that kill innocent black people. There's no mistake about it.
So I want you to say it with me. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter.
I'm Kenneth Shelton. I'm a member of Black Lives Matter Greater New York. The resistance is being co-opted for black people. right? Too many times we have all these resistance groups about resisting Republicans, but now talking about resisting Democrats. Democrats have put on racist policies. Minnesota's a Democratic state. All these Democratic cities, Chicago, even New York, don't value black and brown people. And that's when you get these injustices that take place. So it's important for us in a liberal area such as New York City to make a stand, to say, hey, we're going to come out here and march in solidarity with what happened in Minnesota, but then also we're going to continue to fight and be a shining example for what we should do for black and brown people here in this city.
My name is Helen Hines. I'm running for city council in the Bronx in District 17. When the young man was being taken right out, that can be any of us. I want you to know we don't vote enough, we don't read enough, we don't listen enough, and we are giving away our votes.
Let's go! We don't need them! Need them! All these racist ass cops, we don't need them! Need them!
We're taking the streets. The police don't want us on the street, they want us on the sidewalk. But these are our streets, especially in Harlem. When police violence occurs each and every day, it's important for us to take the streets and show solidarity. That's what they did in Minnesota, that's what we're gonna do right here. Right now, we are on 116th, about to be 115th Street. This is Harlem. Harlem about to enter into the mainstream city. The scene is, this is just, the Juneteenth parade was right there. All these black people are looking and showing that we're standing in solidarity. It's not just black people, it's white people, it's brown people, showing that on one of the most important days to descendants of slaves, which is Juneteenth, that we out here marching for Black Lives Matter.
To leave the roadway and utilize the available sidewalk. If you remain in the roadway and refuse to utilize the sidewalk, you will be placed under arrest and charged with disorderly conduct.
Show this world that they cannot dismiss us. Yes. America needs to see this mistrust. Yeah. The system is broken, but yet they trying to fix us. When I say black lives, y'all say matter. Black lives, black lives, black lives, black lives.
Voices from the streets of New York on Saturday. There were protests around the country after the acquittal of Officer Geronimo Yanez for killing Philando Castile. Special thanks to Sam Alcoff and Jesse Rubin. When we come back, we'll go to Minneapolis to speak with Nekima Levy-Pounds, former president of the Minneapolis NAACP. This is Democracy Now! Stay with us.
Seem like the whole damn nation's trying to take us down. When your brother's dying, mother's crying, TV's lying. All the reasons in the world to me now. See, we thought that we saw that he had a gun. Thought that it looked like he started to run. Thought that we saw that he had a gun. Thought that it looked like he started to run. Am I gonna be a witness? Just gonna be a witness.
Witness by Benjamin Booker, featuring Mavis Staples, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Black Lives Matter protests were continuing in the Twin Cities and other cities after Minnesota police officer Geronimo Yanez was acquitted Friday in the killing of Philando Castile, an African-American man who was shot 5 times during a traffic stop last year.
We go now to Minneapolis, where we're joined by Nekima Levy-Pounds. She's former president of the Minneapolis NAACP and is now running for mayor of Minneapolis. Welcome to Democracy Now! Can you talk about your reaction to the verdict and then the protests that followed in the Twin Cities, Nekima?
Well, number one, I thought that the result of the jury in finding Geronimo Yanez not guilty was absolutely absurd in light of the facts of the case, in light of the circumstances surrounding Philando Castile's untimely death. And people here are outraged. Time after time again, we see circumstances in which officers who kill are not held accountable under the laws of the state of Minnesota. And so we have taken to the streets repeatedly. We started out within hours after Philando Castile was killed last summer. And we waited patiently for almost a year for the verdict to come down, and to see that Geronimo Yanez was not even found guilty on the lesser charges is extremely disappointing and frustrating. And so it means that we have to continue protesting and demonstrating and challenging the laws and policies that allow these police officers to kill people with impunity.
Now, what about the decision of the prosecution, as I understand, not to play the video that went around the world in terms of the aftermath of the shooting during the trial?
Well, it doesn't surprise me that they did not play the video. I mean, some people have raised concerns about the strategy of the prosecution, including during jury selection. When you look at the composition of the jury, there were 10 white individuals who served on the jury, 2 people of color, both of whom were young. I mean, one was an 18-year-old Ethiopian immigrant. The other was a young black man. And when you look at that, I mean, who in their right minds would pit 10 white people in Minnesota against, potentially 2 young people of color and having them decide a case of this magnitude? And so some people are arguing that the prosecution made some mistakes in this case, and not playing the aftermath of Philando Castile's death was probably one of them.
The jury was made up of 7 men, 5 women, 10 of whom were white, 2 African-American. They deliberated for more than 25 hours over 5 days before acquitting Officer Yanez on all charges. After the verdict, the local ABC affiliate in Minneapolis spoke with juror Benita Schultz, who said the jury addressed the issue of race with the 2 African-American jurors hearing the case.
We did ask them if they thought that this was a racist thing, and they were very comfortable about it and did not think it was at all.
This juror, Benita Schultz, went on to explain how the jury arrived at the verdict.
I just hope that they realize that we didn't go by it lightly. We did not favor the cop. We just felt that the state did not prove their case.
Nikema Levy-Pounds, your response. Some of these jurors apparently said they'd never heard of the case as well when they were chosen.
Well, that's absolutely shocking that they hadn't heard of the case. It shows that, unfortunately, some people in our state are out of touch with issues of police-involved shootings and the impacts upon people of color, because this has been a constant staple in the news since Black Lives Matter emerged in Minneapolis in particular back in November of 2014. And so it's surprising that they had no idea about this particular case. And again, as I said before, I'm not sure who in their right minds would choose 2 young African Americans to serve on the jury. Again, one being an Ethiopian immigrant, as opposed to older African Americans, a larger composition of people of color across the board who are concerned about the phenomenon of officer-involved shooting cases, the use of excessive force in the state of Minnesota, and the fact that there is a repeated pattern of failing to hold police officers accountable when they abuse the rights of citizens of the state of Minnesota. The Bureau of Criminal Apprehension was one of the groups that investigated the shooting death of Philando Castile, and they have a terrible track record for holding police officers accountable. We do not trust their investigations or the outcomes. There's no independent group in the state of Minnesota that investigates officer-involved shooting cases. And so it's up to each individual prosecutor and each individual police department to determine how they're going to handle these situations. And that has resulted in officers not being held accountable time and time and time again for killing often unarmed civilians. In this case, we know Philando was licensed to carry a firearm, and he went above the law's requirements in letting Officer Yanez know, and it still did not save his life. Officer Yanez had an unreasonable fear of Philando Castile as a black man. And so we need to look at the criteria that are being used when officers say that they were afraid for their safety. That cannot be the way in which these cases are being evaluated. There has to be some type of objective criteria that's being used, or more people's lives will be in danger.
I wanted to ask you about the role of the political leadership in Minnesota, in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities area. This is generally considered a liberal state, especially the Minneapolis and St. Paul area. The current mayor, the one that you're running against, Betsy Hodges, has been under a lot of fire from the police department for some of her stands. At the same time, other people feel that she has not paid sufficient attention to the issue of these kinds of police abuses. Your sense of how the political leadership of your area has responded to these cases?
Well, the political leadership in our area has responded very poorly. I mean, I've seen this play out over the years. In addition to being the former president of the Minneapolis NAACP, I'm also a civil rights attorney. I was a law professor for 14 years. And during that period of time, I had the opportunity to work on issues such as police community relations. And what I saw were government leaders, including DFL, which is our Democratic Farm and Labor Party, here in Minnesota, being essentially not being focused on these particular issues, ignoring concerns from communities of color about the ways in which people of color were being treated by the police, abused by the police. And Betsy Hodges was one of those people. She ran 4 years ago on an equity platform, and we have yet to see her deliver the results that we've been asking for. All of that played a role in my decision to run for mayor. I mean, I was one of those people standing with the community demanding that she hold police accountable for their abuse against people of color. The Minneapolis Police Department has a long track record of engaging in excessive force towards African-American residents, criminalizing them and harassing them, and that still has not changed under her leadership. And so we have an unprecedented number of people of color who are running to become city council members in the city of Minneapolis. And of course, I am running for mayor because we're ready to shift the paradigm in the city and to ensure that we're actually focusing on equity, that we're holding police officers accountable, that we're looking at racial disparities across every key indicator of quality of life, including economics. If you look at the plight of African Americans in the city of Minneapolis, you have African American men in some pockets of the city facing double-digit unemployment. Those men are often subjected to police abuse, to harassment and criminalization, and the matters are not being addressed simply because the state is deemed to be liberal. I see the recognition of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota as being liberal places as masking the truth of what African Americans and other people of color here are facing, which are conditions that are reminiscent of the Jim Crow South, except that we call it the Jim Crow North here.
During a protest on Saturday, Nekima Levy-Pounds, you encountered several police officers on bicycles. This is a clip of you addressing the officers.
What we're saying is, if you call yourself a good cop, but you see one of your colleagues beating somebody or disrespecting them or treating them like they're less than human, then report them. That's what a good cop does. So we're asking you all to step up, exhibit more leadership, and work to build trust within the community. And if the government isn't going to hold you all accountable, hold yourselves accountable. Thank you.
Nekima Levy-Pounds, can you talk about what you were asking for and demanding?
Yes, we led a protest through the streets of downtown on Saturday afternoon, and we had police officers following us in vehicles. We said that that was fine, but as we were leaving the first precinct police station, we encountered several police officers in an alley, and I was stunned, first of all, to see them there on bicycles, and I just stopped to ask them why they were there. You know, were they there to protect us? Were they there because they thought there would be some form of violence? And I reminded them that we were peaceful demonstrators, that we did not need additional escorts. And then I talked to them about this matter of good cops versus bad cops, because when we're out on the streets protesting, when we're raising concerns about police violence, the pushback is often that, well, there are good cops out there. These are just a few bad apples. When in reality, there is a culture of policing that needs to be addressed. There's a culture of militarization amongst the police that need to be addressed. There's a culture that allows police officers to be killed police officers to kill people with impunity and to not be held accountable, not only in Minnesota, but across the state of Minnesota. And if citizens engage in the type of behavior that we've seen from officers such as Yanez, they would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and probably be under the jail. We don't get the same deference as far as whether we're a good person or a bad person. A lot of us are judged, just as Philando Castile was, by the color of his skin. When Yanez said that he had a wide-set nose and looked like a robbery suspect, and unfortunately he was mistaken, but the color of his skin wound up being a death sentence in that particular case. And so we're saying, listen, if you're a good officer, then don't falsify reports. Don't go along with police brutality and abuse and think that it's enough just because you may not have participated. A good cop is actually going to report the conduct of bad cops and push to hold them accountable so that they can build trust within the community. And I believe that that's part of the message that needs to be spread throughout the United States. What exactly is a good cop? And what standard of care are we holding them to when they're on the force and they're witnessing these acts by officers who are engaging in wayward conduct? I believe that they have a heightened duty to respond in those situations and not to be complicit in that type of abusive behavior.
Nikema Levy-Pounds, I want to thank you for being with us, civil rights attorney, former president of the Minneapolis NAACP, currently running for mayor of Minneapolis. As we switch gears right now to talk about what's happening in Washington, D.C., this is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, 6 members of the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS have resigned, saying President Trump doesn't care about HIV. In a joint letter published in Newsweek, the 6 members write, quote, "As advocates for people living with HIV, we have dedicated our lives to combating this disease and no longer feel we can do so effectively within the confines of an advisory body to a president who simply does not care," end of quote. Trump took down the Office of National AIDS Policy website when he took office and has not reappointed anyone to lead the White House Office of National AIDS Policy.
The resignations come as the Trump administration's continuing its efforts to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, a move which advocates say will especially hurt those affected by HIV/AIDS. We're joined now by one of the members of the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS, who's just resigned. Scott Shottis is the HIV Project Director at Lambda Legal, the oldest and largest national legal organization serving people with HIV. Scott Shottis, welcome to Democracy Now! Explain why you took this move, why you resigned.
Thanks, Amy. We decided that the administration was not listening to people living with HIV, was not interested in engaging with HIV advocates around this issue or the health care reform bill, wasn't interested in having that bill informed by the experiences of people living with HIV or the experts that work in this field or the science, and that once we saw that they were going to simply push through a health bill that was going to dramatically impact and negatively affect people living with HIV, that we could no longer stand by and work within the administration, that we had to step up and force a discussion around this topic.
Well, Scott Shottis, what were some of those concrete signs of why you felt this administration was turning its back on folks with HIV?
Well, they started really during the campaign even. The Trump campaign refused to meet with HIV advocates when both the Clinton and Sanders campaigns were willing to. They actually scheduled a meeting, and then that meeting was canceled, and they refused to reschedule. So the signs have been there for a while. Then we came to Inauguration Day, and we saw that the White House Office of National AIDS Policy website was taken down, and to date, it has not been put back up. There was no one appointed to be the director of the White House Office of National AIDS Policy, and that person really serves as the communication link between advocates, between the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS, of which I was a part, and the administration. And so those were some of the signs that, that this administration was just not willing to engage.
And what are some of the specific responsibility of the Advisory Commission?
The Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS is tasked with bringing recommendations around policies related to HIV, and in particular, they've been tasked with helping to create and oversee implementation of the National HIV/AIDS Strategy. We got our first National HIV/AIDS Strategy in this country in 2010. And so that document guides the work that is being done in this epidemic, which I think it's important for people to realize this is not a thing of the past. The epidemic is still having a dramatic impact upon various populations across the United States. And so the work of the people working in HIV is very important, and it's guided by this strategy. And so the council helps the administration to guide implementation of that policy.
Can you talk more about the Office of National AIDS Policy website that the Trump administration took down?
Sure. I mean, the website is a representation of what that office does. And what's really important is that office having a seat at the table so that when the Domestic Policy Council, the former director of the Office of National AIDS Policy, had a seat on the White House Domestic Policy Council. And so what that office is doing is really bringing the issue and the way that HIV is impacting and still killing people in the United States to the attention of the administration and creating a conversation that will then inform policy that is made by this administration.
I'd like to ask you about your concern about some of the Trump appointees. For instance, in a 2015 interview with former presidential contender Ben Carson, who is now a member of Trump's cabinet, he was asked by CNN's Jake Tapper about his opposition to Planned Parenthood.
To take an organization that not only makes money by selling baby parts, but doesn't seem to understand the sanctity of human life and is willing to destroy that. An organization whose founder believed in eugenics.
You're talking about Margaret Sanger.
Yes, and even today, the plurality of their clinics are in minority communities.
Mm-hmm. Well, doesn't that make the argument that they would make, which is that the services that you're talking about, forget abortion for a second, but the services you're talking about are not available everywhere, and that's where minorities and people who are lower income get mammograms and treatment for STDs and birth control, et cetera?
I thought that they were supposed to be able to get all of those things based on Obamacare. Why do we need Planned Parenthood?
That was Ben Carson speaking during the presidential campaign. Of course, he is now the HUD secretary under President Trump. Scott Shadis?
Yeah, well, this, as you heard in the clip, what they do is ignore all of the important services that Planned Parenthood provides, besides for the abortion services. And there is no doubt that the defunding of Planned Parenthood and the elimination of those services will have a dramatic impact on our ability to fight this epidemic. They provide a bunch of services around sexual health, around HIV testing, around education on these topics that is really important to engaging and educating the population that's most affected. Young people are right now the people most affected by HIV/AIDS in this country. The cohort from 13 to 34 is the place where the new diagnoses are growing the fastest. And so if we are going to get a handle on this, we need to make sure that we're providing services to those folks. And another point that I think Mr. Carson misses is that what the Trump administration is now planning on doing is cutting Medicaid, cutting services to low-income people. You can't do that without dramatically affecting and actually growing this epidemic.
Interestingly, one of the greatest influences on Trump's life was the infamous red-baiting New York lawyer named Roy Cohn, who died of AIDS in 1986. Last year, Trump biographer Wayne Barrett spoke to Democracy Now! About Trump's ties to Cohn.
I knew Roy Cohn. I knew him very well.
And you just cannot understand how Donald could have been this close. I wrote in the book that they talked 15 times a day. One of the two stories here, I can't remember which one, said it was 5 times a day. It's probably somewhere in between. Roy himself told me they talked 15 times a day. But there's no question that next to Fred Trump, Roy Cohn was the single greatest influence in Donald's life.
For young people who don't know Roy Cohen's background back to McCarthy, can you explain who he is and what it meant for Donald Trump to learn at his knee?
Yeah, well, he starts out as, I think he was 23 years old when he was the chief counsel of Joe McCarthy doing all those hearings. He was extremely wired into the Reagan White House. He helped make Donald Trump's sister, Mary Ann, a federal judge in 1983. He was the ultimate fixer, power player in New York for a whole period of time. He died of AIDS in 1986.
That's the late, great journalist Wayne Barrett, who wrote the unofficial biography of Donald Trump. Roy Cohen's longtime secretary, Susan Bell, said Trump abandoned Cohen when he found out Cohen was HIV positive. Bell said, quote, "They were so close, they talked at least several times a week. And as soon as he found out, he took all his cases away from Roy except for one and got new lawyers." Did you know about this, Scott Shottis?
I was unaware of some of the details regarding that, but that's not surprising to me, given what I have seen from this administration and from President Trump in particular. There just seems to be a complete disregard of this community or the continuing effect that HIV is having on populations across the country. Young gay and bisexual men of color in particular, transgender women of color in particular, low-income people. These are the folks that are most affected, and I think it's pretty clear that this administration has little regard for any of those populations.
How many people are left on this commission?
By my count, there are 15 members still remaining on the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. And
the Trump administration responded to the resignation of the 6 of you?
I did see a comment that was made yesterday that pointed to an appointee within the White House that's focused on health. That appointee, unfortunately, is also anti-science. She is not only anti-abortion, she's actually anti-birth control. And so if that is the person who is providing counsel to this administration on HIV/AIDS-related policy, I don't think that that bodes well for how the legislation, the American Health Care Act, is going to be shaped.
Scott Shottis, I want to thank you for being with us, with the HIV Project Director at Lambda Legal, largest national legal organization serving people living with AIDS, one of 6 people who resigned last week from the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. His article in Newsweek announcing the resignations was headlined, "Trump doesn't care about HIV, we're out of here." This is Democracy Now! When we come back, what's happening in Egypt, the number of men who are facing execution this week, and other issues. Stay with us. My Word is Free by Amel El-Mathlouthi. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We turn now to Egypt, where 7 men are facing imminent execution based on confessions that human rights activists say were extracted under torture. 6 of the men are recent college graduates who were arrested in 2014, along with more than a dozen others. While their testimony was captured on camera, the men say they were beaten, shocked with electricity, and hung in painful positions, and then provided with written testimonies they were forced to read. They were sentenced to death last month on terrorism charges after a military trial. Human rights activists are now demanding a presidential pardon to save the men from execution. Egypt's highest appeals court upheld the death sentences. On Saturday, a Cairo criminal court recommended the death penalty for an additional 30 people convicted of involvement in the 2015 assassination of Egypt's top prosecutor, Hisham Barakat. This is presiding judge Hassan Farid.
The court has ruled with the consensus of all its members for the referral of the case's documents to the Grand Mufti for review of what is being attributed to the accused execution.
Other news from Egypt, dozens of activists have been arrested in a series of sweeping raids in recent days. The arrest came as Egyptians took to the streets to protest an agreement to hand over control of 2 islands to Saudi Arabia. Critics say the islands belong to Egypt and that their transfer is linked to the billions of dollars the Saudis have given to support the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's government. In total, some 110 people have been arrested since just last week, with just under 40 released so far. The arrests and raids come amidst a nationwide crackdown against human rights activists and press freedom advocates. Over the past few weeks, the Egyptian government has blocked access to at least 93 news sites, including Al Jazeera, Huffington Post's Arabic website, the self-publishing platform Medium, the local independent news site Madamasser. Well, for more, we're joined by Egyptian film director and writer Omar Robert Hamilton. In 2011, he co-founded the Cairo-based Mosireen Media Collective, which worked to film and document the Egyptian revolution. Omar Hamilton's debut novel is just out. It's called The City Always Wins. Omar Robert Hamilton, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you talk about what's happening right now in Egypt? Start with the imminent executions, unless they're stopped.
Yeah, so the most urgent issue right now is these 6 men. They were rounded up randomly. A police guard was shot outside the house of a judge by a man on a motorcycle in early 2014. And in about 4 days afterwards, 21 men were rounded up, and 6 of them were held. The first their families knew of them was when they appeared on television, visibly beaten and confessing on video. When they tried to tell the state prosecutor that they had been tortured to the point of confession, they were returned to the same policemen that tortured them initially. They were beaten, they were electrocuted on their genitals, they had cigarettes stubbed out on their neck. These are sort of the hallmarks of the Egyptian security services. And even then, so then they were found guilty, they were sentenced to death, and on appeal, even the country's highest appellate court upheld the verdict. So now really the only recourse is for a presidential pardon to happen, and there is a window on that, and it has to happen by June 21st. After June 21st, if Sisi has not pardoned these men, they are executable. And
that's Wednesday.
Yes. So, yes, it's very urgent at this point.
I wanted to ask you about this. Since the Trump administration has come into power, how the situation has changed in terms of U.S. policy toward Egypt and the region itself. Obviously, he went to visit Saudi Arabia not too long ago. Your sense of what the Trump administration impact has been in Egypt?
Well, there's a sense of a green light now. I mean, in the sense that Trump has no interest in even paying lip service to human rights or ideas of democracy. Sisi was the first foreign leader to call Trump and to congratulate him on his election. They've been very public about their affection for each other. They like each other's style of governance. Practically, I don't know how much it actually changes. Under Obama, while Obama seemed distasteful and seemed to not like Sisi and his policies and didn't invite him to the White House, he didn't actually change anything. Egypt continued to receive military aid, as it does now, the second most any country in the world. It gets around $1.3 billion in military aid every year. So actually, Trump is really just a continuation of the Obama process or of the foreign policy that Obama did not change, but without the sort of sense of any kind of possibility of criticism coming from D.C.
And the greater ties between Saudi Arabia and Egypt?
Yeah, so Saudi Arabia is one of the main counter-revolutionary, probably the principal counter-revolutionary force in the region. After the Arab Spring began in 2011, when autocracies began to crumble in the region, and Saudi Arabia has been working very hard to counteract any democratic measures or successes in any countries around it. It's a huge bankroller of the Sisi regime, about $12 billion in aid poured into the country immediately after the military coup in 2013. And now there's potentially up to $20 billion on the table in further investments coming from Saudi Arabia in the near future, which is part of what's going on now with these islands. So the big political issue right now in Egypt is the two islands called Tiran and Sanafir, which are two islands in the Gulf of Aqaba, which control the eastern waterway of the Red Sea. These are Egyptian islands. They are part of Egyptian territory, and it seems that in exchange for this money from Saudi Arabia and the promise of future investment contracts, that Egypt is going to cede control of them to Saudi Arabia. This has been a point of great contention. It's a point of political weakness for Sisi now, particularly as he rode into power on this message of being a sort of nationalist savior.
Do you think that President Trump's first foreign visit being to Saudi Arabia, and I believe Sisi was there, right, when the various Arab leaders were there when Trump visited Saudi Arabia, empowered Sisi, Saudi Arabia as well, and that's been happening in the Gulf as well, and the isolation of Qatar. And what's happening, the authoritarian ways of the leaders. So right now you have Sisi cracking down on websites, close to 100 they've cut off access to, including one you were very involved with.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I think that Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia, the fact that it was his first state visit, and the promise of $100 billion in weapons purchases from the Saudis to the Americans has definitely given a green light to the Saudis. The isolation of Qatar is the clearest and most immediate example of what's going on. I think a key quote when thinking about this is Naftali Bennett, one of the hard-right members of the Israeli Knesset, said that the time has come for a right-wing peace. And so I think what we're going to see is this alignment of American allies from Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Yemen, all now coalescing under this idea of having a right-wing peace, which is sort of authoritarian, where your prime goal as a government is to repress your own citizens and to maintain the power of the ruling elite, and that they've all kind of come to terms with the fact that they can be friends governmentally, and that their main threat to each of these countries is actually their civilian populations.
And meanwhile, the civilian population of Yemen is just being utterly destroyed, devastated by the U.S.-backed Saudi bombing, also the outbreak of cholera, but the crackdown on the media websites, what kind of access to information do you have in Egypt when you're there, and your own media collective?
Well, I mean, the media in Egypt is already very, very, very controlled. The principal media actors in the country are owned by the state. You can't broadcast anything on the radio unless you have a license from the state, and you can be imprisoned for up to 15 years. Even the private media has been very much brought to heel in the years since the military coup and since Sisi came to power. So there's been a very limited amount of dissent in the media anyway, and that is very much constricted or restricted to the internet. And now, basically, it's the sites that have been vocal about this sale of the islands to Saudi Arabia, the sites who have been actually reporting on the news, are the ones that the government has been cracking down on and has been blocking. They're also blocking VPN services. So the question is, how are they doing that, really? Where is the technology coming from? Egypt, in its bid to be friendly with all the major powers of the world, has become the 4th largest weapons importer in the world. It also buys digital security tools from European countries. We know that they've bought digital surveillance tools from Germany, from Finland, and from Italy. So it's also a question of, where are they buying the technologies to have such a wide crackdown? Back
to our first question, the execution of the men. Is there any way that will be stopped?
It's very hard to tell.
It's up to Sisi himself.
Right now, it's up to Sisi himself. He tends to make a point of not bowing to any kind of popular pressure. He is invested in an authoritarian character. So I don't know. We can only hope, really.
Well, we want to have you back on to talk about your novel, The City Always Wins. Omar Robert Hamilton is film director, and this is his premiere book. He'll be speaking tonight at McNally Jackson in Soho on Prince Street at what time?
At 7. At
7 o'clock. That is the end of Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report, at least for today. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdino, Sam Alkoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Trina Ndura, Andre Lewis. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez for another edition of Democracy Now!